He is a change agent. He is a change agent for the people. He's really, this is what's lighting up the people, okay? That's what's lighting up the people right now. And that's just pretty much how he was born. Hi, Adam and Moe. I really enjoyed your show on 45 Savage, and I was very interested in the astrology that you talked about, and I am very much into astrology, and I wanted to share with you a bit of my perspective of Donald Trump from his astrological makeup. And I thought that you both would probably find this interesting. And so I just want to take you on a journey through Donald Trump from the planets and stars. This is going to be a little bit long, so I hope that you both have time to watch it. You can take your time with it. I'm going to try to give you timestamps for different sections of the video. Let me tell you what I plan to talk about in this video. It's going to cover a lot. It's going to be a lot about Donald Trump and also kind of the changes that are going on in the US and the world, because I think that obviously right now as he's president, this integrates a lot with him. The date that I'm recording this is December 28th, so I'm not sure what's going to be happening after this. And what I can say for the future is not predict certain particular outcomes, but definitely can talk about what the energies are and how those interact with his chart and how those interact with, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the United States and a little about the energies that are coming up for January and February 2021, because I think there's a lot of tension, potential for explosive type things to happen, and a lot of aggression, strife, or like as Adam said in the show this past weekend, there is a crucible moment. So some difficult things and things that require the ability to withstand a lot of heat, I think, is what we're looking at. Anyway, let me get started, and let me just tell you what I plan to do for this video. So I want to talk about, I think first I'll give you an introduction, just a little bit of an overview about the astrology and how I use it, and maybe just a little bit of structure. I'm not sure how much you know about astrology, so I'll do that first. Then what I want to do is kind of give you the lay of Trump's natal chart, like the astrology chart that he was born to. I know that Moe, already talked about how Donald Trump is a Gemini, that meaning his sun is in Gemini. But I want to talk about a few of the other placements that he has that impact greatly on him and his personality and how he's developed. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the things that Moe brought up about Donald Trump. I'm not really specifically going to talk about him being a narcissist, but I think as I go through a lot of the placements in his chart, you will see maybe where some of those characteristics come from, and that there's, as you know, everybody's more complex than the labels that we put on them. So I find him fascinating because I do think that he, like I think Moe said, does live authentically. I hope that you see once I go through some of these things that he is really living his authentic life. So we're going to talk about that. Some of the things that you brought up, Moe, about how he picks fights, he's competitive. There's an atmosphere of tension around him. We're then going to talk about this idea that the rallies are bigger than him and where we see that in his chart. The trickster thing we'll take a look at. And I think you mentioned that he said himself that he's a deep thinker. And I think a lot of people probably don't think that he is, just because of the way that he comes off. But I really actually do see that in his chart. We'll talk about sort of not following orders, working outside of the box, Also, we're going to talk about, he does have some pretty significant royal and bright stars in his chart, and that would explain a lot of how he's been successful in his life. And then I want to talk about, we'll talk a bit about the public-private self, and I think how he's an escape master. And then after that, what I'd like to do is talk about a little bit about how some of his characteristics showed up in the difference between him and his first debate and his second debate. I want to talk a little bit about the election. Then I want to talk about where is he headed, because I think looking at his charts and the current transits of the planets to his natal chart, that he's really struggling with something in terms of where he wants to go in terms of his future. I want to look a little bit at the inauguration day, and I think before I get to that, if I remember from my notes, I want to talk about January 6th, because that's about when things really start heating up. Even I think they already are heating up. And maybe we talk a little bit about the U.S. transits and the grand conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, and how that is changing the lay of the land in not only the United States, but the world, and for the next few hundred years. And let's get started. So in terms of astrology, what I like to use astrology for, or at least what it's been for me, is a way to understand myself better. Some part of it is a lot of validation for how I have felt about myself. And the astrology is sort of a way, if you think about the cyclical nature of life and what we know about the solar system and how the sun, we see it rise and set every day. There's a cycle to everything, different lengths of cycles. So the astrology kind of helps you to keep up with those cycles. What's happening now, what's going to happen then. And so the idea is that each of the planets have or at least this is from my perspective, each of the planets have a certain energy signature. And we can see this even in our own science. Every element has a different vibration, a different resonance, and so do each of the planets. And over the millennia, people have observed the planets and what goes on when the planets are in certain positions, and they have ascribed certain attributes to each of the planets, and what the attributes are when they interact in certain ways and when they're in certain positions. So the astrology, when a person is born and the planets are shown in a certain position, we believe that each individual is imprinted with this signature, this energy signature, and that gives a person certain gifts, talents, potentialities. It's sort of a promise of what could happen, and especially just sort of is what sets a person up for how their life may be. And then as we go along, we know that that's just a moment in time, but it's sort of ingrained in your signature. And as the planets continue to go through this cycle, then you have different opportunities of time. It's sort of like when we look at how the planets travel through space in any moment in time, it gives us the nature of the quality of a moment in time. So that's how people know when is best to do something or when is not. And that's why people they don't need astrology a lot of times if they're aware of themselves to know that, because you can feel when something is right to happen. And that's why you see, I guess, on this conspiracy tip, that the quote unquote people in charge create these events around these specific moments in time, because they know that the energies are better for that time. It's kind of like, when is the best time to plant a seed? Is it winter in a temperate climate? No, it's going to be spring. So that's kind of the idea in short of astrology. And we'll be looking at a chart like this for the most part, this circular chart. Just by way of background, I do study traditional astrology. So I use a chart that's called whole sign houses. And if you ever see charts done by other people, they may have a different kind of house system. And by houses, I mean these divisions. There's 12 houses, which you may know, but I'm just going to say certain things as I go along so that we don't miss anything. So for the whole sign houses, there's the whole zodiacal sign fills each house. So there's no spillover of the signs on the house. This system that I'm using is also called the tropical zodiac. So this is just like a measurement system. This is not related to sidereal astrology, which measures the actual movements of the signs and planets. So these signs have just been allotted 30 degrees on the solar ecliptic. That's the path of the sun from the perspective of Earth. So that's sort of a general overview of this zodiacal chart. And I think, let's say, one other thing is to say that each house has a different area of life associated with it. So for instance, the first house has the meaning of self, and a lot of times the health of a person. The seventh house is a lot of time is relationships. The fourth house, these are the major houses that I'm going through right now, is home, family, past, tradition. And the 10th house is career. And I will mention these houses as we go along and talk about Donald Trump. So at this point, what I'd like to do is start with Trump's natal chart. So like Moe said, Donald Trump is, his sun is in Gemini. This is Gemini here. Sun is in Gemini. But before we get to his sun, which is very important to him, but I want to start with what is one of the most important things, at least in traditional astrology. We look at the rising sign. So the rising sign in this case is going to be, we'll find it in the first house of the person. And for Donald Trump, that rising sign is Leo. So he has a Leo rising sign, and that is actually ruled by the sun. So the rising sign is how a person views the world. It's like an interface. It's how people may see him, especially, especially meeting someone who's not sort of your personal, intimate person. But even just generally, I think people can see this. So, for instance, Leo is very showy, and Leo is thought to be, sort of a performer as well. There's a lot of leadership qualities in Leo as well. But a lot of times Leo likes a lot of attention, especially a Leo rising. And I think we can see this in him. The other thing to think about is that Leo is actually ruled by the sun. So the sun, Donald Trump's sun becomes very important for him because it is the ruler of his whole entire exterior persona. So the rising sign is how we get through life, and it sets the tone for each of the other areas of life. But the ruler of his rising sign being the sun would mean that he would bring some of those Gemini qualities to his sort of exterior expression and interface with the world. So he will bring, Gemini is very social. Gemini likes to talk a lot. Gemini is very much into the intellectual details of things, or the information, very much about communication. So we can see that with him. So he would actually bring that into being a showman, and we can see that because he has had a career in entertainment. He is in entertainment. Gemini is very smart. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is considered the trickster, because Mercury could, in the mythology of Mercury could go between. Mercury's the only one who could travel between the different worlds. He can be in the upper world and travel down to the lower world. So Mercury can go everywhere because Mercury had messages to deliver. So Mercury can also be about delivering news. It's about how we think. So Gemini, being an air sign, is very much a thinker, very much a talker, very much wanting to be social, in an air, air meaning thinking, intelligence kind of way. I know most people don't think of Donald Trump that way, but that's where he is with it. So that's kind of his rising sign. Now, what other influences does he have on how he interacts with the world? And this rising sign is also where people go when they're under stress, because that's just the natural way to deal with the outer world. So the thing that I think most people see really in him, and it's funny to me because we see everybody talk about this. So his actual ascendant is in this marker that is AS, and that the ascendant technically is the horizon at the time that a person is born. So right here, this is, it seems backwards, but this is the east and this is the west. So this is the rising place and this is the setting place. So at the time of Donald Trump's birth, which I am using a date that most people use, which is June 14th, 1946 at 10:54 a.m. Queens, New York. There's some controversy about this date, but this is the one that most people use, and to me, it seems to fit him. At the time he was born, he has Mars rising. So he has Mars at the horizon, which means that when he interacts with the world, he has a Martian flavor. Not only does he have Leo showy, but he also has Martian, which is very aggressive. It can be divisive because, Mars is a warrior planet. Mars is also very independent. Mars likes to go after things. Mars is a very it's a fire sign. So this is Mars in Leo, another fire sign that is really going to help inflame this person who has Mars rising. A lot of Mars rising people can be, people can experience them as irritating because they just have that Mars right up front. And so I think this is the thing about his Mars, is that I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but here I go. And if you guys, you can stop the video whenever you want and come back to it, hopefully whenever you can. But because Trump was born in the daytime, Mars becomes a bit more of a troublesome planet for him. Mars is not going to function as well as it would if he were a nighttime baby. So that means that it could become even more inflammatory, more aggressive, more, all of the kind of negative things you might think of Mars warrior-like. But Mars is also, people always like to stick on the negative side of things, but everything, we live in a world of polarity. So some things are more negative than others, but there's always another pole, right? So Mars can be constructive. And I think that possibly as we continue on along the cycles, sometimes we can gain some more constructive behavior out of these planets. So Mars can be a very have a lot of leadership qualities. Mars can also, just it's an initiator. So Mars is good at starting things. Not as good. Mars can burn out because it's the ignition, and then Mars needs something else if it's going to sustain its activity, but it's very good for starting things and leading. The other thing that we note about Trump is that he has right here at his 29-degree ascendant, we find here, he has his ascendant is on a fixed, I think this is also a royal star that is, hold on a second, let me see if I can pull this up. Royal star that's called Regulus. And Regulus, it's within 50 minutes of his ascendant, so it's quite active on his ascendant. This is also, again, the ascendant. This is what he shows to the world. So the fixed star Regulus, this is just the little definition in my software, says it's a royal star of Persia, Latin for little king. It's of a regal quality. It promises glory, fame, and fortune. And so this is a star that just, it's very auspicious, and it's right there at a very powerful point in his chart. So these points that we have at the ascendant, the descendant, and this point and this point, which I'll get to maybe later, but let's just say that these four things called angles are very influential on our personalities. Everything that's in the first house, the seventh house, the 10th house, and the fourth house have a much stronger impact on the individual. Not that the other planets don't, but these are very powerful houses. The other thing that he has going on in his ascendant, and which people see and meet and may have one reaction or the other, is he has Pluto in the first house. So Pluto is a planet of transformation. It can be one of destruction and then rebuilding. So usually Pluto likes to tear things down to have them then build back up. Pluto is investigative. Pluto likes to dig down into the issues. What else can we say about Pluto? Pluto is transformative. Pluto also is associated with power and control. So depending on what's going on, all of these things could come out in the personality of Donald Trump, but he would be seen as a powerful person, or as a controlling person, or as a destructive person, aggressive person. But also, again, Pluto can be constructive. Some things do need to be analyzed, investigated, transformed. And that would be, that's kind of his nature, kind of how he would approach things, just sort of things that he encounters in life. So that's kind of where we are with the ascendant, and you can see with Regulus right here as well that he's just got that sort of extra little something. But I think this is also why people think he thinks he's a king. He thinks he's he's going to be a tyrant because this is out up front for him. This is right sitting out front for him. And I sort of think, what's he going to do? I mean, he can work through his life to make sure that he doesn't become those things. And that's one other point about these stars, is that if they are beneficial stars, if you don't use your energies, your powers, your thoughts well, then they can act against you. But given somebody who's acting with integrity, they really can help a person out. But I think that you can see that something like this would give him a step up in the world. And also, I think his life sort of shows us that just by observing it. All right, so let me just make sure I cover the points. So the Mars rising that I talked about is what leads to him picking fights, wanting to be decisive. This is what makes him competitive. Mars is very competitive. And so this is just his nature. This is who he is. And, so he really is living that authentic life. But it can bring that atmosphere of tension because this is how he presents to people. So I would say that all of this thing, and it's astounding to me how very forward his Mars is, because that's what people really are reacting to. And so let's see, where are we? Ruled by the sun in Gemini. Okay, so again, we talked about how the sun in Gemini is very much about communication. I find this interesting because there was something that Moe said about Trump's rallies being bigger than him. And so when we look at where his sun is placed, and it's interesting because a lot of people don't place his sun in the 11th house. They actually place it in the 10th house, his 10th house of career. But the 11th house is the house having to do with groups, associations, also having to do with hopes and wishes and dreams. It has also to do with sort of maybe in some sense what you do after you've kind of reached your peak. This is kind of, what kind of awards, what are the results of, what you've done for your career in your life. But I sort of see this, I can really see this with all of this, the stuff that's going on between Trump and the people right now, because, and also his love of social networking. So Gemini is networking. I mean, that's another word for, sort of delineation for Gemini, is networking, communicating, going around, getting information from people, giving information to people. That is totally Gemini. Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury is about communication, and Mercury moves very fast. So Geminis are also, not only tricksters, because they have the two faces, like Moe mentioned before, but also just moving very quickly if you think about the planet Mercury and how quickly it moves. So Trump's sun, so the sun represents someone's sort of inner core being, their consciousness, their conscious qualities, maybe even like the soul. So a lot of times we don't even really, we're not necessarily born into expressing our sun. We kind of through life go and develop our true being. That depends on a lot of things. But whereas, say for instance, the moon is our emotions and our natural instincts, the sun is about our conscious qualities and what we want to do with ourselves and how we want to be. So his sort of place of being is in this communication area. Geminis can also, because they are what we call a mutable sign, mutable. So it's very changing. So can be unpredictable, gets bored with things, wants to move from one thing to the next, but can be good at changing things. But what I like is the sun is also signifies leadership. It's warmth. It gives, let me look at some of my notes. The sun is kind of also thought of being a king and leader. So we have that double quality from the star Regulus and the sun. So the sun is also regenerative. It generates its own light, right? All of the other planets, the light that we see from them actually comes, at least as far as we know right now, actually comes from the sun. And the sun provides its own light. So the sun is very strong in that way. It has the power to enlighten and inspire and warm up people. So what I have been seeing right now is, you imagine that in this 11th house, this is the house of the people. This is the house of networks and communities, people who have similar ideas. And we have Trump here right now with his sun shining on the people, giving them inspiration. They're craving this leadership, which is interesting in another way that I see that I may mention in a little bit. But this is really where his goal is, here with the people. So that is the sun. And we talked a bit about the sun being ruled by Mercury, and I know Moe went through a red tie, blue tie thing, and that makes a lot of sense because Mercury is the trickster. Mercury is the twins. I know you went through this, but Mercury is the twins, the two faces of Gemini. So he does really have this at his core essence. Now, his Mercury is also located in the 12th house. So this planet Mercury rules his sun it's in Cancer, and it's in the 12th house, which we consider a hidden house. It's also a house, it can be a house of loss. So, and also sometimes expresses itself as a house of fear. So there can be perhaps for him, sort of this loss, feeling like he's, well, let me back up. So Mercury also has to do with communication. Yeah. So there's this sense of maybe not being able to express himself very well, because we have Mercury, this air sign, in this emotional water sign of Cancer. Cancer is very much about home. It's about protection. So there may be a way where he doesn't communicate out exactly what he feels. He protects his thoughts. He may also have trouble. There's a lot of emotion related to his thinking and his expression. And the other thing about, I guess I'll go into that a bit right now with Mercury, is that, how it's difficult to understand him sometimes. And I sort of see that, first of all, he's got what we call Chiron in this house, the third house of communication. And so Chiron is about things where we have, how do you say, like a wound. So he could have had a wound around his ability to express himself with being in Libra, express himself with a sense of balance, and, express himself well in relationships. Maybe even some sort of wounds with his siblings as a youngster, or some sort of trouble learning or communicating in early education. So that's one thing that that could have happened. But the other thing is with Mercury, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, we have what we call a square, like a 90-degree relationship. A square is like friction. There's some friction. It's in the nature of Mars. So between Mercury and Neptune, which is about confusion. There's confusion, fantasy, just sometimes lies. So this is where we may get the sense that he's not always quite telling the whole truth. There, he's got Neptune in the third house of communication. So there's just not a lot of clarity all the time in the way that he communicates, or people may not understand him, even though, like, he says that he may be telling the truth, but the waves, the sound waves are not coming through that clearly. The connection is not 5 by 5, as you would say. So there is that. But what Neptune can also do is it can create a lot of imagination. In this way, there is just, he has to sort of resolve some sort of conflict between his community and home. So there's some kind of way where he doesn't understand how to maybe express himself properly in the larger networks of in his community. Also, with Mercury being in the 12th house, there is a relationship to the larger collective, the super consciousness. It's a kind of, also can be a spiritual house if you get past the sort of karmic kind of stuff that's in this house. So his Mercury, he may actually have a lot of inspirational ideas being in the 12th house. He may even, being in Cancer, which is also a very sort of psychic kind of, can be a psychic sign. So having Mercury there, Mercury in water is not that clear, but he can have more of an intuitive connection with his thoughts and get a lot of connection about what the collective wants. He gets this from the 12th house. And this also informs his sun, which is speaking to the people. So I find that very interesting. The other interesting thing about his Mercury is he has what we call Mercury out of bounds. So Mercury out of bounds, what does that mean? Give me a second to open up, see if I can show you. Okay. So when we talk about planets being out of bounds, so let's find his Mercury. Here we go. Mercury. So when we talk about out of bounds planets, we're talking about their declination. And so what that means, so when we talk about the sun on the ecliptic and the season, so this is tropical astrology. This is tropical Western astrology. So we're using the path of the sun and the seasons. So we start the zodiac at 0 degrees Aries, and the sun, so when we're looking at the solstice, so we just had the winter solstice, or I think they want to call it something else now because it's different from the northern and southern hemispheres. But anyway, so it's when the sun travels a path between 23 degrees and some minutes south and north, and that's the path of the sun. And so when we look at the path of planets, if they're within that range, then they're sort of within the range of the rule of the sun. So the sun is sort of overruling these planets in some sense. But when the planets travel outside of that range, so you see here, when he was born, Mars was out of bounds. it was at 25 degrees north, which is several degrees above the north boundary of the sun. So that's why we say his Mercury is out of bounds. So his thinking, his communication, his, what he does, and that's probably why I have heard rumors that he can't sleep very well at night. It's probably, sort of that. He's got his Mercury is out of bounds, just out there. His mind is out there. It's in the 12th house, sort of receiving messages from the ethers. This is just my thought. So when we have out of bounds planets, they don't follow the rules. And we can see that in the way he communicates. He's not bothered by what the sun says he needs to do. He's not in, his mind and his mouth are not controlled by any restrictions that we have within the rules of the sun. And he kind of has, so this is a lot of why he doesn't follow the rules, especially in his communication. This is why I just find this so fascinating. So, not everybody has an out-of-bounds planet, but when people have an out-of-bounds planet, they're free to do what they want with it. So he's free. This is why he feels free. Not only is it out of bounds, but it's ruling his sun in Gemini. It's ruling how he communicates with people, how he uses the airwaves, because Gemini is technology and communication. So this is why he's just really into the technology and the communications. One of the reasons why. So I thought that was an interesting point, where you just wonder, why is he just so, he's just so not controllable in terms of what he says, unless he wants to control it. I think we've seen recently that he can sort of step back and be quiet. And he does prefer that Cancer is the house of home. And we say that his Cancer is in the 12th house. Actually, I'm actually Leo rising as well. So I really I have planets in different places, but I sort of relate to him a lot in certain ways. So he does like to keep his thoughts private. People think, he's putting it out there for sure with Mercury controlling Gemini, but there are things that he keeps hidden in terms of his thoughts. This is a house of retreat as well. So when he says he's a deep thinker, this is where he is doing his deep thinking. He's doing his deep thinking at home. He's protecting his thought. He'll put a barrier around him so that people really can't get to his inner thoughts. The stuff that he puts out there, that stuff he puts out there is Mars. That's his Mars stuff. But his real inner thinking stuff is kept at home. So that's Mercury out of bounds. All right, so another interesting point about him, I think I can combine these two, is that Trump was born not only on a full moon. So you see, a full moon is when you have the moon opposite the sun. And it was almost exact. The moon was just about to be a full moon at 21 degrees of Sagittarius and the sun at 22 degrees of Gemini. But he was also born on a lunar eclipse. Yeah, very close too. So this was probably a full lunar eclipse. And those are sort of full moons are, for people who are born on a full moon, it's more like they are born into the world with their goal sort of is probably more clear for them. Like there's a lot of activity in their life. They probably are able to produce a lot in terms of where they want to go, because if you think about the full moon, this is the height of the lunar cycle. So all the time from the new moon to the full moon, there's a building and a growing, and once it gets to the full moon, everything is ready to be harvested. So people who are born on a full moon tend to have a lot of things going on. They tend to be in the spotlight because, this is sort of the brightest time that, we have the full moon is so bright. There can tend to be for him a conflict between what he needs, his intuition, and what he really wants, who he truly is. So there's a bit of a balancing act that he needs to do there. For him, with the moon in Sagittarius in the 5th house, he feels, he gets his nourishment from adventure, from creativity, from fun, from romance, from his children. A moon in the 5th house would really mean he really, really loves his children. He wants to nurture them. He has a great love for his children, and maybe even other children as well. But there may be some sort of distance sometimes, because this moon in Sagittarius would like, a lot of travel, but also may have quite a few. He really needs this connection with spirituality, his beliefs. There's an emotional response to him for either religion, spirituality, what his belief systems are. And they may be changing, like the moon, how the moon changes. So there's that aspect. People with a natal full moon are also, or can be good at negotiations, because they have a knowledge or a sense of what another person needs, so they know how to maybe give the person what they need. But there can also be a lot of conflict, because we have this opposition between one person and another. So it's really, for him, it requires a lot of balance. And so we see that repeats again, this Martian quality that he has to himself. We have these conflicts here. Now, the eclipse sort of puts that full moon on steroids. So it really means that it just really enhances that, and that he came to this lifetime to have this peak experience. And I'd say he did it, or he's doing it. I actually think that he's not even quite there yet, or he probably is. I'm going to get to that in a minute. This moon conjunct the south node, that's the south node right there, can also mean that he can sort of lose relationships with maybe women, or he may feel like he's not nurtured enough, and we will see that repeating in his chart as well. And he has just this hunger. He has a hunger to be a leader. He has a hunger to be seen as, sort of a father figure. He has a hunger to communicate and be a leader of the people. This is what I see in this sun conjunct the north node. The north node is kind of like where we just feel this hunger. Sometimes it can be even excessive need for this. He's got an excessive need to communicate, to socialize, to be a leader, to be seen. Now, I just wanted to mention this other royal star that is right at his MC. The MC is the medium coeli. This is the position where the sun, this is the position at the height of the day, where this is the highest point that the sun would reach on the day that he was born. So it's really, this is the spot that we say, because it's the top, the apex, this is where we have our reputation, you know, how the world sees us. I mean, this is kind of that too, but this is where, you know, like our career, our reputation, what we're known for. And so for him, it's in Taurus. So Taurus is known to be, Taurus is an earth sign, right? So it's kind of about stability. And I know people don't think that, but it can also be about finance. It can be about property. So we know that for him in his career, he has been involved in those types of things. So it's interesting that he has that for the top. Right here at his actual MC, though, we have a star called Algol, which historically is sort of a malefic star. I think they say that it can be seen as somebody who gets their head chopped off. It can be like some people who have transits to this star that's significant in their chart can have sort of sudden accidents. So if I were him in the time of Taurus season, I'd be careful around transits around this star. Let's see what it says. In modern times, it's connected to bringing subconscious to light. And I sort of feel like this is what we're seeing right now. You know, his brightest spot, you know, his highest recognition is bringing the subconscious to light. And you see that just how all of these people, you know, they're bringing out, like, a lot of the criticism that comes towards him is about things that people actually experience for themselves, but they reject it, you know, so it's in their subconscious. So they actually project on him what he's, I mean, you know, admittedly expressing, you know, some negative traits with this aggression and divisiveness and stuff, but what he's actually pulling out of people by just being in, by just being, is their subconscious things that they just don't want to deal with. That's my interpretation of Algol here at his MC. And the stars are quite strong. So I can't remember what was it's within 1 degree. That's still a pretty strong conjunction. And whenever another planet passes over there, it's going to actually activate that or connects with it. So I thought that was an interesting point in his chart. Okay, let's move on to another interesting aspect. Moe said something in the podcast. He said something about, I have the note, I can't remember the entire context, but something that, didn't know you could play president by these rules, which is totally, wait, I don't want that one. Totally Trump, okay? He does not, like, we already talked about his Mercury not playing by the rules, right? We already talked about Mercury being out of bounds. We already talked about him being ruled by Mercury, which is kind of all over the place. But what he also has here is this planet, Uranus, in very close contact with his sun. It's just, 5 degrees away. And also, it's informing his north node, which is what you crave. So when we put the sun together with Uranus, what we get is a lot of unexpected things. Uranus is actually forward thinking. So he does have that. And that's at his core being because it's the sun. Uranus is unexpected. Uranus is charged. It's like electrically charged. It's the modern ruler of Aquarius as well. I want to say something about that in a minute, but a lot of Uranus is just like unexpected things. Let me look at my notes a little bit here. It's enlivening, it's explosive, it's unconventional, rebellious, innovative, fast-paced, unstable, chaotic. So these are all terms that you hear describing Trump, and these things are immersed in his being, because when the sun is close to another planet like this, even an outer planet like this, when the sun is conjunct a planet like this, the essence of the other sun is or the other planet is soaked up by the sun. So he is essentially this Gemini sun with this unexpected, chaotic kind of thing. And that's also what people feel, because this sun with Uranus all rule his first house, right? But it's also this sun and Uranus thing that is charging up the people, right? Remember, this is the house of the people. This is the house of, yeah, I mean, there are other people who do not align with him. But these people right now who are just really this is the energy. I heard another astrologer say, when he was elected in 2016, it was really about this new, fresh energy, right? This something different. That is Uranus. He is something different. I mean, yeah, right. He is something else, but this is something that is not going to be separated from him. And his path with this North Node, his path is to be this. He is a change agent. He is a change agent for the people. This is what's lighting up the people, okay? That's what's lighting up the people right now. And that's just pretty much how he was born. Now, let's talk a bit about his relationships. So I know, let's see, Moe talked a lot about daddy issues, and I know that that's shown to be true. This here, the full moon can also show that. The full moon can also show that he perceived his parents as having, say, not the smoothest relationship. Maybe they argued, and I think I read something about that there was a lot of separation between his mother and father. This also, the Uranus and Sun thing, the Sun representing the father, and let's say Uranus representing Trump, is probably also caused him to have issues. Like, Trump was very, this Uranus is non-conventional. So he did not fit the mold that his father wanted him to be. So I know I said two different things, but we can read the charts differently. So this can not only represent who Trump is, but also his relationship with his father. The other thing that I think is really significant, so not only did he have daddy issues, he had mommy issues as well. Here with the moon conjunct the south node, there's like a dissolution of something. I do know actually his mother was sick. I looked this up. So I think when he was a toddler, his mother, when she had his younger brother, ended up being in the hospital for a very long time. So he was actually separated from his mother, and his mother was sick for a while. So this is sort of like a weakening of the moon mother nurturing relationship. So he had that going on. He also had, sun opposite moon, which is also more separation from the mother and separation from the father. One of the very significant pieces about how he experiences love is this one, which is Venus conjunct Saturn. So Venus, as you know, even people who don't look at astrology know that Venus is about love. It can be about comfort and pleasure, and it's also about money, peace, and it's combining, what else should we say about Venus? Venus is also about peacekeeping, diplomacy, harmony, arts, creative. So we can see a lot of these things coming out with him. But when Venus is next to Saturn within 2 degrees, it's also, Saturn is restrictive. Saturn is, it separates. Saturn has a lot of rules. It's dry, all of that beautiful stuff that Venus wants to do. Saturn comes in and says, no. Saturn puts a stranglehold on the love and beauty. And so this Saturn conjunct Venus is a very difficult aspect to have, because the individual who has this placement can feel that love is withheld from them, which I think when we look at the history of his father and even his mother, that he, whether it's true or not, which I think, we think that it's true, but whether it's true or not, the chart is about the person's perspective. So for him, he did not get the love that he needed. This is also in his, in Cancer. So at home, home was not sort of the loving, the loving place for him, because there was just a stranglehold on the love that was meted out. What else can I say about that? And this restriction too on Venus, because Venus rules his house of communication, and Venus also rules this house of career. Now, even let's say this, there was something that Moe also said about Trump being privately loyal, and this is also shown by Venus. So as hard as Venus conjunct Saturn is, Venus conjunct Saturn, even though Saturn has these strict rules, Saturn is also very committed. So when you have Saturn there is a commitment. There's something that's in there for the long haul. So for him, if there's something that he loves, he's very committed to it. He also has, I know people say that he hates women, but it's not that. Like he may not give as much love and affection to them in the beginning, but I think the longer he has a relationship with them, Saturn is committed to them. He also likes strong women, and I think that you can see that. So Saturn sort of strengthens up the women in the life, and you have here also with Venus in the 12th house, he's got a lot of strong women behind the scenes supporting him, and also supporting his career and his public life. And it's because it's interesting. I know people note that, well, I think maybe, what is it? Ivana, I think maybe she has said some negative things, but he, for the most part, I mean, he has pretty good relationship with his ex-wives. Now, Venus in the 12th house can also be hidden relationships, So I think he's had that as well, but he's definitely loyal, and he also feels like, or he could feel like, he does not have that a lot of people aren't loyal to him because it's in the 12th house. So he feels a sense of loss around loyalty in his relationships, a sense of loss around stability in the relationships. But again, as time goes on, because Saturn being Chronos and ruling time. As time goes on, Saturn gets better. So Saturn gets better with age. It can, I mean, everybody has free will. Even though we look at the energies, everybody has choices at every point in time. But the point is that, it's possible that these relationships that he has, the good ones, so this is something where Saturn also rules his house of relationships. So Saturn can bring a little bit of sweetness to his relationships, but it's, the forming of the relationships can be one very slow, or they can sort of pull apart if they can't get hold in the beginning. The other thing that Saturn conjunct Venus can do is create a huge age difference, or a big age difference in relationships, which I think we can see for him. Anyway, that's the loyalty piece. We talked about the 12th house, public, private. So he really does, I know I mentioned this, I just want to make sure I'm complete with this. He really does, Cancer being in the 12th house, he's really likes to keep his home life protected, right? He likes to keep the 5th house being children and, let's say, recreation, creativity. He likes to keep that, to himself. This is hidden. This is not stuff. Yeah, he plays golf or whatever, but he really likes to do, keep his children safe, keep them, everybody's at home, sort of not really out in the public. He's not really like that type that wants to just drag all of his business out in the public. He likes to keep his relationships private. Here's the thing, though. He also, having Mercury in the 12th house, there are a lot of behind the scenes dealings for him. A lot of behind the scenes agreements, negotiations, contracts, that kind of thing, that he has going on. The 12th house, the other thing about the 12th house is it's also called the house of self-undoing. So there can be an aspect that his relationships are, however he deals with his relationships or his home life can lead to his undoing, that kind of thing where you say you did it to yourself. So people with 12th house planets really have to be mindful of what's going on here, because they can, cause more trouble for themselves than necessary. Same thing with the Mercury, same thing with his mouth, same thing with what he says can be his undoing if he's not careful. And so this is directly related to, his undoing can undo his career and his home life. So things going on there, he really has to be careful about. So he's the escape master. Let's move on to that. One thing is that I've heard another astrologer say that this placement of Jupiter, which is actually his strongest planet, and Jupiter is about its luck, it's good fortune. Jupiter likes to expand things, bring good things, and this may be also why he does talk a lot too, because he's got Jupiter in his house of communication. But Jupiter in his house of communication would also give him, luck in terms of communication as well. So luck in terms of his community, his siblings. I think he may have actually good relationships with his siblings. He may also just kind of fall into luck in his kind of day-to-day, especially his sort of domestic travels even. And then there's a relationship here that Jupiter has a relationship with Saturn and Venus. Venus is another beneficial planet. It's not the most beneficial for him, but Saturn can be very constructive for him, but Saturn is still a malefic planet. But when you have two benefic planets surrounding another planet, especially in this house of hidden things that kind of come out to attack you, he has a way of recovering from that because of the placement of these two planets. Jupiter also rules his house of fun and play, so that's directly related to what he does in the community. His fun, he has fun from his communications. He has fun from his relationships and adventure. You know, this is what he likes to do. All right, so that is the lay of the natal chart for Trump. Now, one thing what I want to get into next is some transits, and I'm mindful of the time, so there's a lot to talk about here. And maybe I will do this part in a separate video. And that's probably a good idea.